You have been designated a surplus employee, effective immediately. One typed sentence on company letterhead. On the morning of March 30th, 1993, in the Hudson Valley of New York, that sentence was handed to nearly 8,000 people before the sun went down. One of the largest mass dismissals in American history, delivered in a single day by a single company. Michael Cunningham got his copy in a conference room he had walked past for 16 years. He was 41, a wife, 3 kids, a factory job he had built into a specialist's career. Around him, guards patrolled the hallways while grown men and women packed their desks into boxes. "I felt like a prisoner," he said. 16 years I was there, and they had people walking security. The company escorting him out was not some startup running out of luck. It was IBM, the bluest chip on the American stock market, the most admired corporation on earth. This is the story of how the most powerful company in the world nearly destroyed itself and what it paid to survive. Because 1993 was the year IBM almost died. To understand the fall, you have to feel the size of what fell. At its peak, the company the whole world called Big Blue employed more than 400,000 people. Its salesmen wore the same dark suits, sang from an actual company songbook, and sold machines so trusted that an entire generation of executives lived by one sentence. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And inside the company lived a promise. Through the Great Depression, through the war, through every recession since, Big Blue did not lay people off. Lifetime employment was not a slogan on a poster. It was the deal. The founder's covenant, father to son, company to company town. In Endicott, where the company was born, in East Fishkill, whole valleys organized their lives around it. The company ran the Christmas parties. It ran the family days. 1 in 5 jobs in the county traced back to those gates. The son, Thomas Watson Jr., had earned the empire its crown in the 1960s by gambling the entire company. $5 billion, more money than the company took in a year, on a single machine, the System 360 mainframe. The gamble worked so completely that for 20 years, computing and Big Blue meant the same thing. Mainframes carried margins most businesses can only dream about, and every year the money came in like the tide, which is why the empire never saw the weapon coming. It should have. Big Blue built it. In 1980, a small team of engineers in Boca Raton, Florida, was given 1 year to build something headquarters considered a toy, a personal computer. To hit the deadline, they broke every rule in the company Bible. They bought the chip from Intel instead of building their own. And for the software, the operating system, the machine's soul, they signed with a small company in Seattle run by a 24-year-old named Bill Gates. The deal had a clause in it. Microsoft kept the right to sell that same operating system to anybody else. One paragraph in one licensing agreement for a product headquarters barely respected. Nobody fought it. The IBM PC launched in August of 1981, and it conquered the world. Then the clause went to work. Within 2 years, a Texas startup called Compaq had legally cloned the machine, and after Compaq came an army. Every clone was a copy of that standard, and every clone shipped with Microsoft's software inside it and Intel's chip at its heart. Big Blue had invented the future of computing and handed the 2 most valuable pieces of it to somebody else. For a while, nobody in headquarters felt it. In 1984, the company booked the largest annual profit any corporation had ever recorded. The mainframe still printed money. For a while, nobody in headquarters felt it. In 1984, the company booked the largest annual profit any corporation had ever recorded. The mainframe still printed money. The PC sold in the millions. The stock climbed toward $175. Inside that fortress of profit, every warning sounded like noise. But the future had already moved. Computing was sliding off the mainframe and onto desks, and the profit was sliding with it, toward the software and the silicon it didn't own. The empire made one last play for the crown, a next-generation operating system for the desktop, one the two companies were building together. Then, in May of 1990, Microsoft shipped Windows 3.0, its own product, a runaway hit, and walked away from the partnership. The software throne now belonged to the Empire's former ally, one on the machine the Empire itself had invented. The crack, when it finally showed, came from the top. In the spring of 1991, a manager sat in an internal training class taking notes because the chairman of Big Blue was in the room, and the chairman was angry. John Akers, more than 30 years a company man, a Navy pilot, the very model of the dark suit faith, told the class that company people had grown too damned comfortable at a time when the business is in crisis. The notes went out over the company's internal mail and spread like a grass fire, then leaked to the press. For the first time anyone could remember, the world heard Big Blue call itself a company in crisis. In its own chairman's voice, the numbers made it official. 1991, the first losing year in the company's history. That December, Akers announced he would break the empire into 13 pieces, semi-independent companies the press nicknamed the Baby Blues. It read less like a strategy than a will. Then came 1992, a loss of $5 billion. At the time, the largest one-year loss any American corporation had ever reported. The dividend, untouchable for decades, would soon be slashed. The stock that had touched $175 was falling toward $40. In January of 1993, 1 week after that announcement, John Akers resigned. The board went hunting for a savior and discovered how far the crown had fallen. The most celebrated executives in America, Jack Welch of General Electric among them, would not touch the job. Running Big Blue, once the summit of business itself, had become a position nobody wanted, and while the board searched, the bill came due in the valley. March 30th, 1993. The notices, the guards in the hallways. By nightfall, nearly 8,000 people in the Hudson Valley had been declared surplus. It told me I was excess baggage, Michael Cunningham said. Junk, garbage. The promise that had built the valley, the covenant that survived the Depression, was dead, and everyone standing in line with a cardboard box knew it. Reverend James Heron ran a small church in Fishkill, halfway between two of the company's plants. By November, 29 of his 140 congregation families were gone. I had settled in with the feeling, he said, that part of life is taken care of. That was the thing about the promise. People had built entire lives on the assumption. Now the county braced for collapsing school budgets and property taxes, and the help wanted pages offered service jobs at a fraction of the old wage. Cunningham found one of those jobs, a technician's post at a veterans hospital, $13 an hour. In September, he was laid off from that job too. In October, he underwent open-heart surgery. By the end of the year, the valley had lost more than half the jobs the company had given it, and the company towns of the Hudson Valley had become something new in America, monuments to a promise. The savior, when he finally arrived on April 1st, 1993, looked nothing like salvation. Louis Gerstner was the first outsider ever to run the company, a former McKinsey consultant who had run American Express and then RJR Nabisco. The press sneered that Big Blue had hired a cookie salesman. Wall Street wanted a grand plan, a new religion, a vision. On July 27th, announcing a $9 billion restructuring and 35,000 more job cuts, Gerstner gave them his answer, a sentence American business still argues about. The last thing IBM needs right now is a vision. What the company needed, he said, was execution. And his first great decision was to do nothing the plan demanded. He refused to break the company up. The baby blues died on his desk. Big Blue would stand or fall whole. One company, rebuilt around services, around solving problems instead of only selling machines. It worked. Over the next 9 years, its value grew nearly sixfold. The obituaries stopped. The empire, alone among the fallen giants of its generation, clawed its way back. But the company that survived was not the company that fell. The suits relaxed. The songbook was history. And the promise, lifetime employment, the covenant that made the company towns believe, never came back. That was the trade, and it is the honest heart of this story. The company lived because the deal died. The people who had believed longest paid the most. On the very last day of 1993, Thomas Watson Jr., the man who gambled the company and built the age of the mainframe, died in Greenwich, Connecticut. The worst year in the company's history ran out with him. Louis Gerstner died in December of 2025, praised as the man who saved Big Blue. 7 months later, on July 14th, 2026, the company's stock fell 25% in a single day, the worst day in its 115 years. There was no fraud, no scandal, just investors concluding, once again, that the oldest name in computing had seen a platform shift, this time artificial intelligence, arrive faster than it could answer. The chief executive stood in front of the cameras and said 5 words the ghosts of 1993 would have recognized. This quarter, we faltered. Every collapse tells you what a company was really selling. International business machines sold certainty to its customers and to 400,000 people who believed the promise. The machine survived. The promise did not. And somewhere in the Hudson Valley, the price is still walking around. As of the summer of 2026, Wall Street is still deciding whether the oldest name in computing has seen the future in time, but the Postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.